Hey everyone, welcome to the channel for another Escape from Tarkov video. This time, looking at 3 recoil-focused M4A1 builds. The M4 is one of those weapons that just keeps getting better as you dump money into it. And what this means is that it's hard to make a low recoil M4 on a budget, but if you're willing to put the money in, you have a full auto laser rifle firing M995 and dropping anything in your sights. Like my previous video covering low recoil AK builds, I've got 3 different setups for you in this video. A budget focused build, a mid-tier setup, and a high-end super expensive build. Keep in mind that when I'm going over the stats, my recoil control skill might be higher or lower than yours, so our recoil numbers might not be exactly the same. One more thing I'd like to say right at the start is that for the 5.56 and 7.62 x 51 weapons, the Daniel Defense Wave MUZZLEBRAKE and Suppressor combo is currently the all-around best in slot for recoil control while also suppressing your shots. What this means is that any of these builds can be made suppressed and still have amazing recoil numbers. However, it's also about 63,000 rubles, which is kind of on the expensive side. I'll be showing all of these builds with and without the suppressor, and I'll include a separate price for the build with the suppressor as well. So with that all out of the way, let's take a look at the first recoil-focused M4 build I have for you. The words budget and M4 don't usually go together in the same sentence, and it really is quite hard to put together an M4 with good stats for what you would call a budget price. That being said, I think this build performs pretty well for the price that you invest in it. First off, this build starts with some gunsmith sorcery that turns a semi-auto ADAR into a full-auto M4. All you need to do is buy the rifle for about 25,000 rubles on the flea market, and then buy an M4 lower receiver for about 20,000 rubles from mechanic level 2. Drop this one in place of the ADAR lower receiver and you've just made the cheapest possible M4 in Tarkov, complete with most of the base parts that you need like a barrel and charging handle. Next, I field strip almost everything off the ADAR except the charging handle and start adding parts. First off, to complete the base, I add an MK12 gas block and an SI advanced buffer tube. The gas block can be found at mechanic or peacekeeper level 2, and the buffer tube is sold by mechanic level 4. The gas block gets rid of the front sight post for easier aiming, and the buffer tube gives you a nice bit of recoil reduction at a pretty good price. The first part I add to the build is the PWS CQB 5.56 compensator, sold by peacekeeper level 4 for about $100 or by skier level 3 for about the same price. Next, I go for the MOE-SL mid-length handguard, sold by skier level 2. At around 11,000 rubles, it's the cheapest handguard with extra recoil reduction available for the M4. I add an M-lock rail onto this handguard and then attach a ZENIT RK0 foregrip sold by skier level 3 for about 6,800 rubles for some decent affordable recoil reduction. For the stock, I usually go with the MFT BUS stock sold by peacekeeper level 3 for my budget recoil builds, because at $80, it's got some really good recoil reduction. And finally, since the ADAR doesn't come with a pistol grip, I usually will go with the HERA Arms HG15 pistol grip, only about 4,000 rubles at mechanic level 3, but you could also use the Hogue grips or just a default AR-15 grip. For the optic on this one, I just went with an EOTECH XPS hollow sight for about 16,000 rubles on the flea market, and I'll be going with that as the average price of a red dot for these builds. If you want to use a more expensive scope, obviously that's going to bring up the overall price of the build. For the overall stats on this one, I got the recoil down to 57 with the ergonomics at 52 with a 60 round drum mag attached, which is pretty solid in my opinion. The total price of this build is just over 100,000 rubles if you get the ADAR on the flea market and buy everything else from the traders. It definitely isn't as cheap as the budget AK setup I made in the previous video, but for an M4, I think it's pretty solid. With the Daniel Defense Wave suppressor attached, the build comes out to 51 recoil, but the ergonomics go down to 46 with a drum mag attached because of the suppressor. That would add around 50,000 to the build as well, bringing it to about 150,000 rubles. Next up in this video, I've got a mid-tier M4 setup that I think is pretty solid, offering very nice full auto recoil control for a fairly decent price. You can make this build using the ADAR conversion I showed in the last one to save a couple bucks, but I'm going to assemble this one from the ground up. To make the base of this setup, first I buy the M4A1 lower receiver from mechanic level 2, then the MUR-IS upper receiver from peacekeeper level 4, and finally the 370mm AR-15 barrel from peacekeeper level 3. These parts together cost about 75,000 rubles, and because of the upgraded upper receiver, your base stats will be a lot nicer right from the start. Next, I add a RAPTOR charging handle and an SI advanced buffer tube for mechanic level 3 and 4, and now the base of the rifle is complete. You can go with a different charging handle here if you want, but if I'm buying one from the traders, usually I like to buy the Raptor. For the muzzle device on this one, I'm going with the BULLETEC flash hider for the maxed out recoil reduction stats. As I mentioned earlier though, the wave suppressor is also top tier for the muzzle device. You can find this compensator at mechanic level 4. For the handguard, the MK10 AR-15 handguard is actually really amazing for its price of 15,000 rubles. It has the same recoil stats as the best in slot handguard, but costs less than half the price. Some people might not love how it looks, but it really is a cost-effective option. Next, I buy an Alexander Arms 10-inch rail and then attach a foregrip. For a cost-effective option, I like the MAGPUL RVG grip sold by Peacekeeper level 3. However, this handguard can take the HERA Arms CQR grip as well, which is an amazing foregrip, but also double the price of the RVG. If you go with this one, add about 10,000 to 12,000 rubles onto the total price tag. For the stock and pistol grip on this build, I just kept it the same as the last one, the MFT BUS stock and a HERA Arms HG15 pistol grip. For the sight, I went with an EOTECH again on this build, and I'm just going to add 16,000 rubles as an average price for a red dot sight of your choice, and going with a magnified scope will raise the overall price. For the overall stats in this one, I got it to 46 recoil and 60 ergonomics with a drum mag attached, which is really good and lower than the best in slot recoil of some other weapons. The total cost on this one is about 160,000 rubles without a suppressor, and around 200,000 rubles with the wave suppressor. That's definitely a bit of a step up from the budget focused build, but it's also under 50 recoil, which is getting into laser beam territory even on full auto. The crazy thing is though, that you can get it to go way lower. Finally, we come to the high-end best-in-slot recoil build for the M4, one of the most expensive individual builds in the game, but also one that gives your M4 the recoil of something like an MP5. The build starts off with the same base as the previous one, an M4 lower receiver, MUR-IS upper receiver, a 370mm barrel, SI advanced buffer tube, Raptor charging handle, and MK12 gas block. Once this is all together, the first big addition is the SAI Quad Rail handguard, sold by Skier level 4 at the steep price of around 40,000 rubles. The handguard itself isn't really that amazing, but it allows you to attach a very unique piece, the SAI jailbreak muzzle device from Skier level 4. This thing adds a bunch more recoil control and accuracy to your rifle, and you can also add a compensator to your build underneath this thing, and I went with the BULLETEC compensator from the last build for maximum recoil reduction. If you want to use a suppressor, you can't add the jailbreak muzzle device, but running this build unsuppressed lets you get the recoil down ridiculously low. No worries if you do prefer it suppressed though, because as I mentioned, the wave suppressor still has some pretty amazing recoil numbers. As a foregrip for this setup, I went with the ZENIT RK2 foregrip sold by Skier level 4. Normally, I don't particularly like this one because of the ergonomics penalty, but the M4 has such high ergonomics with this build that you almost don't even notice the penalty. For the stock, I switched over to the HKE1 stock, which has the same recoil control as the MFT stock, but more ergonomics, which helps with the build. You could also go with an MOE stock here, but this one is a little bit cheaper. Next up, a new addition in the 0.12 patch is the crazy expensive PSG1 grip, which runs about 25,000 rubles, but also gives you an insane amount of ergonomics. You can definitely get away with a cheaper pistol grip here, like the Graal S or HG15, but this one is the best in slot, and I figured I'd show it here. A final little addition to the setup that you can make is a pair of backup iron sights for extra ergonomics, and I went with the KAC folding sights, about $55 altogether. Keep in mind that you can also add a rear sight like this to both of the other builds. Again, for the optic, I'm just pricing the build out with the average price for a red dot sight of about 16,000 rubles, but I would usually run a build like this with a hammer or Valde for more versatility at long range. For the overall stats on this build, I got the recoil down to 32 without a suppressor and 38 with a suppressor, which is as low as some 9mm weapons, turning this rifle into a full auto death machine. The ergonomics is pretty high as well, at 62 to 68 even with a drum mag attached, letting you aim pretty quickly even when you're using a scope. It's actually kind of insane how much performance you can squeeze out of an M4 in this game, but the price tag is also kind of insane as well. For the total cost on this build, you're looking at a price tag of around 260,000 rubles without the suppressor, or around 280,000 rubles with the suppressor. To put that in perspective, I have a few videos on my channel showing full loadouts that cost less than the price of this rifle. However, if you're rich or just don't care about your money, this is one of the best PvP builds in the game, and I really enjoy using it. Well, that about covers it for these 3 builds. I hope you found them helpful and that you can take some of this information and use it to help set up your own M4s. You don't have to copy these exact builds, but at the very least you should have a good idea of some attachments that can make a solid M4 build. I'd also love to see your own recoil-focused builds, so feel free to share them in the comments. I'll be streaming more Escape from Tarkov on Twitch at twitch.tv/jdogthewise, and it'd be great to have you drop by the stream, so I'll leave a link for that in the description. I send out notifications on Twitter and Discord when I go live, so I'll link those down below as well. Thanks for checking out the video. As always, feel free to leave any comments, corrections, or suggestions down below. And until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City.